In Ghana today, when you buy a piece of land, you will most likely get a lease, usually a 99-year lease. And I've had many people ask and wonder why that is so, because before they bought the land, they didn't have any lease intended. But after paying for the land, on their indenture, it shows that they own the land for a certain lease term. So in this video, I want to explain land leases in Ghana, and I'll do so by answering some four common questions that I am often confronted with. So the first question I'll answer is why you get a lease when you buy land in Ghana. The next is why 99 years. So many people wonder why leases usually last for 99 years. They find it unusual. The third question I'll answer is what happens after the lease has ended. So many people wonder about this too. Then finally, I talk about freehold interests in Ghana. Is it even possible to buy land in Ghana and get freehold? So freehold is when you own the land forever. When you buy land and you own it forever. As many people expect it to be after buying land, they expect to own it forever. As against leasehold interests, which means that the ownership of that land will come to an end in some point in the future, as is the case when you buy land in Ghana. So, to the big question, why do you get a lease when you buy a piece of land in Ghana? So, the brief answer or the short answer to that question is the law in Ghana. So, land ownership in Ghana is governed by several legal sources. First, we have the Constitution, the 1992 Constitution, which is the supreme law we have in Ghana. Next, we have the Lands Act 2020, which was actually passed in 2021. So previously, there were several acts of parliament which governed land in Ghana, but all of these have been consolidated into one body of law called the Lands Acts. Then we have case law. So case law are law based on court judgments. Then we also have customary law, which are laws based on our customs and traditions. So these are the sources of law that governs land in Ghana. So Article 267 Clause 5 of the 1992 Constitution actually prohibits or prescribes the creation of freehold interest from stool lands. This provision in the Constitution is reinforced in the Lands Act 2020 and even expands it to include family lands and clan lands. So stool lands, skin lands, family lands, clan lands, all of these come together to form what you call customary lands. And as I have just demonstrated, the law in Ghana does not allow the creation of freehold interests in customary lands. But aside customary lands, we also have what you call state lands, state invested lands. The law does not make any express provision on the acquisition of state lands. However, because the state controls state lands, the state does not allow the acquisition of field interest from state lands too. So that means that in Ghana today, when you want to buy a piece of land, be it customary land or state land, you can't get freehold, you can only get a lease. But why does the law take this position? So the whole idea behind this law is to preserve or protect the perpetual ownership of land by the indigenous people so that the indigenous people do not lose their ancestral lands. So that 100 years from now, 200 years from now, lands in Accra will still be owned by the traditional people or the indigenous people of Accra. Lands in Asante will be owned by the Asante people, and so on and so forth across the country. So there are some historical events that culminated into what we have today. Some interesting historical events that I would want to share with you, but I wouldn't go much into that in this video. Perhaps I'll create a part 2 of this video and delve more into that. To the next question, why 99 years? So why do you get a 99-year lease when you buy a piece of land in Ghana? Why not 100 years or 120 years or 80 years, which are more of round figures? So many people find this 99-year lease. But the truth of the matter is that the law in Ghana does not really specify how long a lease should last, especially for citizens. For non-citizens, however, the law specifies that a lease should last for a maximum of 50 years. So the 99-year lease is actually a feature of British common law that we've adopted into our legal system. And it has become the convention for the maximum number of years a citizen can get a lease for, especially when they are acquiring customary lands. So the difference in years between citizens and non-citizens reinforces the whole idea that citizens have a greater stake in our lands. But remember that a lease is a contract, and like any contract, the clauses or the terms in the contract are negotiable. So the 99-year lease is actually not guaranteed. It's also negotiable. So in actual fact, you can get a lease of a lesser duration than the 99 years, or even longer duration than the 99 years. But in practice, what usually happens is that the lease lasts for 99 years for a shorter duration. Sometimes too, when you buy a piece of land, you don't get a 99-year lease. It means that you may have bought the land not from the original landowner, but from an existing leaseholder. So, for instance, let's say I buy a piece of land from one of the customary authorities, then and I get a 99-year lease. I occupy this land for say 10 years. After the 10 years, I decide to sell this land to another person. So the person who buys this land does not get a fresh 99-year lease. They get the remainder of my lease, which is the 99 minus the 10 years I've occupied, which is 89 years. And this, in legal terms, is called assignment because I have assigned my lease to the next person. Likewise, I can also decide to sublet or sell part of that lease for say 25 years or 30 years to this other party, so that after that 30 years has elapsed, the land comes back to me, the leaseholder, and this we call sublease. Now, what happens after the lease expires? So you acquire a piece of land, you get a 99-year lease. What will happen after the 99 years has elapsed? Many people wonder about that because the 99 years feels like forever. It feels like it will never come. And the truth of the matter is that in many cases, for many people, their leases even outlive them. But in theory, once a lease expires, it is expected that the land should revert back to the original landowner. So the customary authority or the state that granted the lease, the land should revert back to them. And the land here includes the buildings. Buildings on the land is part of the land. And so all of that should revert back to the original landowner. But ordinarily, what happens is that once a lease expires, or even before the lease expires, there are some negotiations for the renewal of the lease for a fresh lease term. But this is subject to the approval of the landowner. So the landowner or the landowners can decide to agree or not agree to a renewal. But usually, it is expected that there is a renewal of the lease. But because of that, to be on the safer side, what some people do is to states expressly a renewal clause in the lease contract right at the beginning when the land was being bought and the lease contract or the lease agreement was being drawn, so that once the lease ends, the renewal becomes automatic. It doesn't have to depend on someone's approval. And that is why it can be advisable to engage a lawyer when buying a piece of land, so that the lawyer can advise you on some of these clauses. But we will all agree that's 99 years or even 50 years is quite a long time. And so, as I said, for many people, their leases even outlive them. And the truth is that our legal system in Ghana has not really experienced a lot of lease expiries to even make useful inference from. And the law recognizes this. Aside that, too, land, we all know, is an economic commodity. It is bought with money, more so when there are buildings on it. And so it might be a challenge when we begin to evict people from the land that they've harbored for so long. It's not prudent and not practical. And the law also recognizes that. And so to ensure that our legal system is not overwhelmed sometime in the future when lease expiries become very common, the law allows some room for renewal of the lease upon expiry of the lease. So it is expected or it is implied that once a lease ends, the lease should be renewed for a fresh lease term. However, the law goes further to make some distinctions between an indigene, a citizen, and a non-citizen. So for an indigene who holds a lease in any piece of land in a community, once the lease ends, the renewal of the lease is automatic. It doesn't have to depend on any form of negotiations. except that once there is enough grounds, unless there is enough grounds to refuse the lease, the renewal should be automatic. For a citizen who is not an indigent, and also for non-citizens, the renewal of the lease is implied, but it is not automatic. So once the lease ends, there can be some form of negotiations. So for instance, they can get a lease with terms which are different from the lease that has just ended. But this leads to the question, who is an indigent, or what is the difference between an indigent and a citizen? I'm sure some will be wondering about that. So an indigent, from the context of land, an indigent is a person who originates or who is a native of the community in which the land is located. And this is often determined by customary law. So for instance, Akans are matrilineal. So if you are Akan, it means that you are a native of, or you are an indigent of where your mother comes from. Gang Adan base are patrilineal, and so on and so forth. So if you own a piece of land in the community where your mom comes from, it means that you'll be treated as an indigent. Finally, what about freehold interest? Is it even possible to buy land in Ghana today and get freehold interest, like own the land forever? Because truly, there are some people in Ghana today who own their land on freehold. So the answer to that question is yes. In some circumstances, it is possible to buy land in Ghana today and get freehold. So remember that the whole idea behind why our laws restrict freehold acquisition of land is to protect or preserve the indigenous ownership of land. But while this principle has always been with us, even since the colonial era, this principle has only gained prominence in our laws with time. So our earlier laws didn't really emphasize on this principle, especially the colonial era laws. So with time, this principle of preserving indigenous ownership of land has increasingly been represented in our laws and has become foundational. With time, has become foundational in our laws. So let me give an example. You realize that the 1992 Constitution, which restricted acquisition of freehold interest in customary lands, only mentions two lands. It didn't emphasize that family lands formed part of customary lands. It took the Lands Act 2020, which was actually passed in the year 2021, many years after the 1992 Constitution, to include that in the to include family lands as part of customary lands. So what this means is that in the past, people were able to acquire freehold interest from family lands, especially. So you realize that the freehold interests in land that exists, especially in Accra, exist in the older neighborhoods of Accra, where lands were acquired earlier in our history, like in the 1980s, 1970s. So you realize that in areas like Osu, Mamprobi, freehold interest in land exists. But in the neighborhoods that developed later, freehold interest in land is virtually non-existent. So if today you want to acquire land and get freehold interest, then it means that you can only do so when you buy land from individuals who were able to acquire freehold interest in land in the past. Other than that, you only get a lease when you acquire land. So I believe you found this video insightful. You've learned something from this video. As always, don't forget to like the video, share to others, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching.